So look, we're entering the most competitive time of baseball right now. Throwing 90 miles an hour is no longer enough. 95 is the new 90. But most pitchers train for years and never even get close to 90, let alone 95. Just like me, when I was 16 and I was stuck at 78 miles an hour. But 16 months later, I hit 96 miles an hour. So if you're looking to get to 90 miles an hour and beyond, and do it without hoping you're naturally talented or wasting years on ineffective training, then this short video is for you. But here's the thing, I'm not gonna give you the top 10 throwing drills that claim to increase your pitching velocity by 10 miles an hour, because that's not what you need. What you need is to understand the 5 exact underlying principles of what makes up a high velocity pitcher. This is what I followed to go from a 16-year-old throwing 78 miles an hour with no hope of getting to the next level, to an 18-year-old throwing 96 miles an hour and eventually throwing 98 miles an hour in my professional baseball career. And it's not just me. Hundreds of our athletes are getting this similar results. Just like this athlete who hit 96 miles an hour, or this athlete who threw 95 miles an hour, or this one who hit his first 94 miles an hour and is leading the nation in strikeouts. And that's why even big leaguers trust their development in us. Now, I'm gonna deliver to you the exact 5-step process in excruciating detail plus more in just the next 30 minutes. So if you don't have 30 minutes to invest into your baseball career, well, I guess then this system wouldn't be a good fit for you anyways. Let's dive in. Okay, so the first step I took from going from 78 to 96 miles an hour in 16 months was high CNS throwing. And what does this mean? Well, it basically means throwing at high intents to train the central nervous system. And so when you're throwing at high intent, it trains the central nervous system and the muscles and the tendons to fire really quickly, which is what is needed to throw at a high velocity. If you're always throwing at low velocities and lower intents, then you're not actually training all the necessary muscles, tendons, even the central nervous system to have to go out and throw hard. And so you need to be incorporating some type of high central nervous system training type throwing. And what does this actually mean? Well, for me, when I was going from 78 to 96 miles an hour, I did 2 high intensity throwing days a week. And so this included the first day I would do some type of pull down. Now, why do I love pull down so much? Well, basically with pull downs, it is the throw that you can throw at your highest velocity possible. When I was throwing in the mid to upper 90s off the mound, I was able to pull down low to mid 100s. And so what does this actually do? Well, firstly, it is developing the muscles, tendons, the central nervous system to actually have to go out and produce that amount of force. But specifically with the pull down, it's adding a lot of energy into the throw, more energy than you could ever produce on the mound. When your body gets exposed to that type of stimulus, it adapts to start throwing harder. And this is what the SAID principle is all about. And it stands for specific adaptations from imposed demands. And basically what it means is the body adapts to what it's exposed to. And so if it's exposed to, very high velocities where you're pushing the limit of how hard you can throw, then it's gonna adapt, and that's gonna transfer to the mound. And so it's gonna train, again, the muscles, tendons, central nervous system to be able to throw harder. And so, the old saying goes, and I know it's very cliche, is to throw hard, you need to throw hard often. So if you're trying to throw, 90, mid-90s, and you're not even training to throw hard and you don't throw hard in your training, then how do you expect to get there? And so the first one was pull downs. And another reason why I love pull downs so much is because it molds your mechanics into high velocity mechanics. And more specifically, it helps with the lead leg block because it's such a linear move, right? You're creating so much linear momentum, you're sprinting, turning, and then throwing as hard as you can. Your lead leg has to stop all of that momentum. And so it's developing a really, really strong lead leg. And so that's kind of why I love the pull downs. And with the high CNS type, high intensity, high CNS type throwing, it can be really anything. It could be off the mound, it could be pull downs. But for me, this is what I did. I did pull downs on one day, and I also did a plyo velo on the next day. So why did I do plyo velos and why do I use plyo balls? Well, basically, in our brains, we have a idea of how we should be throwing a baseball because we've done it our whole lives, right? But when we put something foreign in our hand, like a plyo ball, then the brain senses that it's something new. And so it's easier to make mechanical changes. And so when I was going from 78 to 96 miles an hour, the funny thing is I didn't really think about mechanics too deeply. But what I did do was do pull downs, I did plyo velos. And what these helped with, especially the plyo velos, was I'll do a bunch of different drills. I started off with the pivot pickoff. This was just a warm-up drill. And then I would go into some type of roll-in where I'm facing the target, I'm stepping and then throwing. I would do a rocker drill right here where I'm rocking back and forth, learning to control center of mass. And then I would do something like just like a delivery throw or like a turn and burn, something like that. And all of these drills are working on something specific. For example, with the roll-in, it's working on separation and staying back and closed, right? And so with something like the rocker throw, it's teaching how well you can control center of mass. And so all of these drills are helping me mold high velocity mechanics. And so that's kind of why I did plyos, but you can do it on the mound, you can do whatever type, as long as it's high intensity throwing. The reason why I like this so much as well is because you can track your progress, right? If you're doing pull downs, plyo velos, mound velos, then you can really see if you are making improvements or not over time if you are doing this type of training. Where it's like, okay, one day I'll pull down 95. Okay, I'm trying to beat that next week. It's like becomes a competition. If you're not training like this, then you never know if you're actually making progress because you're not measuring your progress, right? But if you can measure your progress and you're like, okay, this week I hit this, and so next week I'm gonna try to beat it and try to beat it, and it slowly stacks up. And that's how I went from 78 to 96 was every single week, I would just try to beat my previous week. And obviously it didn't work out like that all the time. It was more like, okay, it's like stagnant, and then I get a big jump, stagnant, big jump, and it usually went like that. But that was my mindset. It was like, no, I'm gonna try to PR every single week. And that's how, you can really get some outsized returns and big results is by stacking really good training days and trying to beat your previous week every single week. And in terms of incorporating high CNS type training, I'll structure it something like this. So I would have one day where I have a high workload, and this is where I'm doing a lot of my high intense stuff. It might be pull downs, plyo velos, mound velo type stuff. Then the next day we need to recover. So we need to come right back down. If we have all of this workload on day one, then the next day we need to recover. Don't even lift on this day. We want to stack all of the workload on one day. Now we recover. And then the next day we can do a little bit more, but then we're going to recover again, okay? And then the next day, now we can go back up again. And then the cycle repeats. And so what does this actually look like? Well, this might be a Monday. This might be a Tuesday, a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then you can repeat that. And so make sure you're going from high intent and then you're actually recovering, because if you do this wrong, then it can be very dangerous. Okay, now that we've covered a lot of the throwing side of things, now let's get into the lifting side of things, and this is where it gets really juicy. So the first thing that we want to focus on is force production. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, you need to be able to produce the necessary force to be able to throw at 90 plus, and in my case, in the mid 90s. And so what does this actually look like? Well, firstly, we need to build real strength. And the kind of markers that I like to see with strength, I like to see at least a 2 times body weight squat, 2 times body weight deadlift, and I would actually even increase that to like a 2.5 times your body weight if you're using a trap bar. And with the bench press and like the upper body, I would say if you can bench press your body weight, then that would be good. And especially with chin-ups, you want to be strong in that as well, 10 plus reps. And so once you have kind of built this and you're able to do this, I will consider you to have a good strength base and you have the necessary force production to be able to throw hard. But that's not enough. Strength isn't enough. How many times have you seen someone And this might be you who is super strong. They have the strength to be able to throw hard. And you might even have all of these markers to be able to throw hard, but it's just not showing up. And so that's where rate of force development and elasticity comes in. And if you're someone who hasn't hit those markers, this is a pretty easy way to really develop the force production. And so there's this thing called progressive overload. And basically what progressive overload means is you're trying to lift more weight than you did the previous session. Kind of similar to when you're doing your high intent throwing. And so if you're doing squats and you start at 135 pounds and you do that for one session, well, you're trying to increase that by a couple pounds every single week or every single session. So you might go from 135 to 140 to 145 and so on. And what I would recommend for guys who are just starting out would be to follow a very, very simple program that focuses on the compound movements. And so for me personally, I followed the 5x5 program, which is basically you're taking compound exercises and you're pretty much only doing squat, bench, deadlift, pull-ups, or some type of row. And you're doing 5 sets of 5 of all of those. And so if I did 5 sets of 5 of 135 pounds, then the next session, I'm trying to do 140 pounds for 5x5 and so on. This builds crazy strength. It's very, very simple, but it's actually something that I would recommend. Because I wouldn't want you to overthink or get confused about your lifting, especially if you're a newbie. I'd want you to just focus on progressively overloading until you can hit a lot of those markers, and then we can get a little bit more advanced. Now, if you're someone who's a little bit more advanced, you have hit those markers, well then, how do we continue to progress after you've built a strength base? Well, that's where rate of force development, elasticity type training comes in. So why isn't strength alone enough to make you gain pitching velocity? Well, yeah, it'll get you to a certain point, but there's this thing called point of diminishing returns. And it looks kind of like this, where this is your strength. So you start when you're a newbie and you're super weak and you're gaining a lot of strength, you're gaining a lot of strength, gaining a lot of strength. And when you hit the markers that I kind of talk about, it kind of caps. And so it doesn't really help you that much to actually increase pitching velocity. And so if you can already squat, 400 pounds, getting that to 600 pounds probably won't help you that much, and it'll actually increase the risk of injury. And so it's just not worth it for us baseball players and pitchers to actually go out and try to hit that. And so how do you continue to level up from here? See, the pitching delivery happens in milliseconds. And so once we've built the force production and your ability to actually produce the amount of force needed to throw hard, well, now we got to be able to tap into that. It's not enough to just be strong. I'm sure you've seen a lot of guys who are very strong but can't transfer that onto the mound. And a lot of the time, this can be the issue. And so there are 3 ways I love to tackle this issue to be able to tap into the force that you just created and the strength that you created and be able to tap into that, into the pitching delivery. And so firstly, velocity-based training, VBT style training. And basically what this is when we were trying to build force, we were trying to lift a lot of weight and increase the amount of weight that we were trying to lift. Here, we're actually gonna do less weight, but quicker. We're gonna make it as quickly as possible instead of it being as heavy as possible. And so what does this actually do? Well, it's training the brain to turn on the muscles really quick, right? And it's training the fast twitch muscle fibers to be able to fire really quickly. And so when you're training VBT style training, it basically teaches the necessary components to be able to turn on your muscles really quick so you can tap into the force that you built. And so that's VBT training. Another one that I really love is called overcoming isometrics. And so you've probably seen overcoming isos where you can grab a barbell and you're pulling against something that won't move. And so it's just an isometric where you're pulling or pushing against something that is an immovable object. And what this basically does is a couple things. So it increases rate of force development. When you're pushing against something that's not moving, it's going to recruit more muscle fibers. And so it's teaching rate of force development, how much force you can actually tap into, okay? And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is it's really good for the tendons. It trains tendon stiffness. So it gets those tendons to be a lot more stiff, and stiff tendons are able to snap back quicker. And so this is getting a little bit more advanced with the overcoming isos is a lot about the tendons and how quickly you can apply force rather than how much. And this is really similar with the plyos and the impulse type training, which is basically you are doing some plyometrics, and you can, for the impulse stuff, you can add bands. Either it be something that pulls you down or something that is a overspeed stimulus where it's assisting you. And so these are just training elasticity. And so how quickly you can get off the ground, how quickly you can fire your muscles and your tendons. And so this is just training tendon elasticity, how quickly you can turn on your muscles, how quickly your central nervous system can actually activate, which is super important to develop a high velocity frame and a body to be able to throw harder. A lot of this stuff is just building the engine to be able to throw at a high velocity. And so this is the progression that I follow for the weight room. First, focus on force production, then work on rate of force development and elasticity. But the thing is, even if you're jacked and even if you have so much force, if you can't access deep ranges of motion, then it's not going to work in the pitching delivery. So this brings me to my third point, which is deep ranges of motion. So what does this mean? Well, it can also be called mobility, but with a little bit of a twist. So we don't only want to be able to be super flexible. We want to be strong in these deep ranges of motion. And so I'll give you an example with the dumbbell bench press. We don't want to just have really flexible chest and like get into deep ranges of motion. We also want to have power and strength in these deep ranges of motion. Because if we're able to access that in the pitching delivery right here, it's cool that we can access it, but we still need to be able to fire out of it. And so how do we train this? Well, my favorite ways of training this is stretch strength. And this can also be weighted stretching, but basically you're taking weights and you're going through a full range of motion, and then you are exploding out of it. And again, with the dumbbell bench press example, it is right here and you have a heavy weight. Drop it and you go to a full range of motion where you feel a deep stretch in the front of your shoulder and your chest. But then you have to fire out of it, which is creating strength in these deep ranges of motion. Another one would be something like the ATG split squat, where you're going through a full range of motion, you feel a deep stretch in your hip flexor, and then you got to power out of it. So developing strength in these end ranges, which can really be helpful in the pitching delivery. And by going through full ranges of motion, you're developing tendon thickness. Like we talked about with the overcoming isos, that is creating tendon stiffness. But when you're going through full ranges of motion, it's creating tendon thickness. And so this will only help you with producing more force and being safer when you're actually throwing. So everyone talks about mobility, but yes, we want to be very mobile and be able to access deep ranges of motion, but we also need to be strong and powerful in those end ranges if we want it to transfer to the pitching delivery. Now we're starting to really build out the frame and the engine to be able to throw in the mid-90s and beyond. But we're forgetting a very key piece, which is one of the biggest things to develop the frame to be able to throw harder. And that is body composition. And we want to have optimal body composition. Now, what does this mean? Well, you can have all of this, but if you're a skinny kid weighing 150 pounds, you'll probably still throw hard, but you're not going to throw as hard as you can. And so we need to work on our body composition. When I was a 16-year-old throwing 78 miles an hour, I was a skinny kid weighing 155 pounds. And so I needed to gain a lot of muscle and weight really quickly. And so why is this? You probably heard the term mass equals gas. And this is only partly true. Mass only equals gas if it's lean mass. And so basically, if it's muscle, then it'll help. If it's fat, then it's not. And so how do we actually do this? Well, if you're a skinny kid weighing 150, 155 pounds, well, we have to gain a lot of weight. And so basically this comes down to nutrition and being in a caloric surplus. So gaining weight is easy math. You just need to consume more than you actually burn. And so what does this mean? Well, so if you're burning, 2,000 calories, right? And then you're taking in 3,000 calories, that would be considered a caloric surplus because you're consuming more than you're burning. And it's just inevitable for you to gain weight. Now, if you're someone who can't gain weight or you're a hard gainer and you're like, I really just struggle to gain weight. Well, the cold hard truth is you're just not eating enough. You're probably not tracking your calories and you're just probably not eating more than you burn. And so the one thing I will say with diet is that I don't want you to overcomplicate it. Just focus on calories and protein. I want you to get in as many calories as you need to actually see your weight go up. With every single meal, I want you to get a lot of protein in. And how I did this when I was a very skinny 16-year-old with a very high metabolism, I was a hard gainer, I thought I couldn't gain weight. This is what actually happened. In the morning, I had a high calorie shake. I would put everything in there. I Googled what are the most calorically dense foods and I would just chuck everything. And it was kind of disgusting. It was like olive oil, raw eggs, protein powder, coconut oil, everything that I could find. And this would be a massive calorie shake. So it'd be close to 1,500 calories. And I started my day off with, okay, I'm trying to get 4,000 calories in. And now I just knocked out a 1,500 off the bat. And it made the rest of the day way easier. And so what did I do the rest of the day? Well, peanut butter sandwiches, I crushed those. So it was 5 to 6 of them a day. And these are really awesome because they're so easy to make. They're pretty high in protein and you can just snack on them the whole day. And so when I had 6 of them, that would be like 2,000 calories right there. And so I'm at 3,500 calories just from my shake and my peanut butter sandwiches. And then the rest were covered by my lunch and dinner where I would load up my plate with some type of meat and do it that way. And that's how I really ballooned up. When I was 16, I was 155 pounds. And when I'm throwing 96, I was 215. And so I gained 50, 60 pounds within these 16 months, and it had a dramatic effect on my pitching velocity. If you're a hard gainer who is really struggling to gain weight, well, you just need to eat enough and consume more calories. But don't overthink it. Don't think about the macros, micros, all of this stuff. I just want you to think about the calories. How many calories are you taking in? Think about the protein. Okay, how much protein are you having? Once you have those set in place and you're combining it with the lifting, progressive overload, you're directing all of this calories and the food to a good place, well, that's when you're gonna gain a lot of muscle and you're gonna balloon up. And I mean, if you have a high metabolism, a lot of it isn't gonna be fat anyway. Now we've built out the frame to be able to produce the amount of force needed to throw in the mid-90s and beyond. But the last piece and the most important piece is actually being able to transfer it to the mound. And so what does this mean? Well, we need to develop high velocity mechanics and sequencing and energy transfer. So all of this is to be able to build the frame and the body to be able to throw at a high velocity, but now we have to convert it onto the mound through your mechanics. And so with mechanics, everyone is different. Everyone can accomplish things in a different way. But there are some underlying principles that everyone needs to hold true to be able to throw pretty hard. And so the 5 underlying principles are: number 1, your leg lift, you need to shift your weight somehow. You need to get your center of mass moving toward the target in some capacity. Some people are very aggressive with it and they go right here. Some people, like myself, are very subtle with it. I'm more here and then I slowly shift my weight. But you do need to get some energy transferring horizontally and not just vertically. What happens when you don't shift your weight and you're on a balance point, well, is when, okay, now you have all the force production going down instead of going this way. And in pitching, we need to produce as much force going toward the plate because that's where we want to throw, right? And force plate data actually shows that the highest velocity throwers produce the most amount of force, not only vertically, but horizontally as well. And so that just means they're producing so much force going down and forward. And so that's principle number 1. The next one is with the back leg. You need to get some type of back leg load. There are two main ways of doing this. You can be an externally rotated guy who's more of a vertical shin angle, which is more like myself. I really like to load into my glute, my legs, and all of that before I fire. Or you might be an internally rotated guy who you can really get into internal rotation and throw that way. But you need to get some type of load, right? When you shift your weight right here and then you get your load going, well, if you shifted your weight, then this load is actually going to be a lot of force horizontally and not just vertically, because if you haven't shifted your weight, all you can do is go down. But you have, then it's down and forward. And so you need to get some type of drop or a load in your back leg, however you might want to do it. The next principle is you need to create separation. So once you're here, now you need to create separation. How do you do that? Well, the back leg is going to rotate and it's going to create the pelvis to open halfway. This is key. So the back leg is going to rotate and it's going to open it halfway before the front foot hits. Okay, and now when the front foot hits, this completely opens the pelvis. Now all we need to do is stay closed with the upper half, right? And then this is creating hip to shoulder separation or separation. And hip to shoulder separation is very important because it accounts for 80% of pitching velocity, right? That's why you can be on your knees and then throw and you'll get 80% of your max velocity off the mound. And so this is very important, but the one caveat is the timing is more important and how explosive it is more important than how much hip to shoulder separation you get. And so if you can time it up really well and be very explosive, even if you don't have a crazy amount of hip to shoulder separation, you're still gonna be able to throw hard. If the timing is off and you're not very explosive, but you get a bunch of hip to shoulder separation and you try to throw from there, it probably won't work. And so the last principle with the lower half is the lead leg block. And basically what the lead leg block is to stop all of this momentum. If you think about a car crash analogy, right? This is the engine, this is like the car. It's going as quickly as it can. It's creating as much force as possible. And then the front leg, it's the crash. You need to crash it. And so this crash is gonna allow the upper body to catapult forward and transfer all of this energy that you created. It's gonna crash it, and what does it do? It sends it up into the upper body to be able to throw, right? The front leg is also important because it pops open the pelvis. The back leg isn't just going to rotate the whole pelvis. It's gonna do half the job, and then the rest of it is the front leg where it's here, and now it extends and it puts the pelvis in a really good position to create separation. And so those are kind of like the underlying principles that I think about. Obviously, there is the arm spiral, the arm action, the glove arm, all of this stuff. But the main underlying principles are the ones that I just talked about. With the upper half, I like to just stay relaxed as possible and stay close. A lot of with the glove side that can do is if you're pulling like this, then it can pull you open, and that's just not what we do. We just want to stay closed. We want to stay quiet with the upper half until our front foot hits, and then we're pulling down like our life depends on it. Again, people can do it in different ways, and this is why it's so important to have a coach. And so if you can have a coach who knows what they're talking about, who knows the principles, but can also see how you move and what kind of athlete you are, then they can help you create the best high velocity mechanics they can for you, specifically for you. This is what kind of changed when I went from, I was 78 to 88 miles an hour. And then I went and worked with a coach who really knows what they were talking about. And this just took me to a next level where they told me, okay, these are the underlying principles, but we also want to do this because this is the type of mover you are. For example, I'm a very big force production guy. I'm very, very strong. But my weakness is being able to tap into it. And so a delivery like an aggressive drift and then pulse and being very quick didn't really work for me. I needed a little bit more time to gather my weight and really produce that force. And that's something that worked for me. But you see in the big leagues, there are many guys who work with very quick mechanics where they're drifting and they're very explosive, elastic, and that works for them. If I had tried to do that, then I wouldn't be throwing nearly as hard as 96 miles an hour. And this is why it's so important to have a coach who can guide you in the right direction for the mechanics, but also for all of this to be able to give you a specific plan built for you. Now, I know that was a lot of information, and the question becomes, how do you get similar results to me and the other guys that I showed in this video? Well, the first option is to take all of that information in this video and try to figure out by yourself. And that's definitely a viable option. But from what I've seen, baseball players have such a precious amount of time to be able to get good enough to get to the next level. You don't have infinite time to be able to go and gain pitching velocity to be able to get to the Division I and professional levels. And over time, it becomes very expensive if you're doing one-on-one training and you're doing sporadic in-person visits and all of this stuff. And honestly, your chances of throwing 95 plus are extremely slim. But that's why I created the Pitcher Lab and I co-founded the Pitcher Lab. And this is a company where we specialize in helping pitchers gain pitching velocity. And so, what does this involve? Once you enter our program, you go through a full week of assessments. And from there, we built a full stack program just for you. And it will incorporate everything that I talked about in this video, from throwing, lifting, medicine ball stuff, plyo ball stuff, mobility, even mechanical drills. Everything in a program you would want, you're going to get. How we do this at the Pitcher Lab is we assign you a mechanical specialist. And each of these guys have worked at the MLB level. And they've worked with big leaguers. And they're going to work with you to make sure your mechanics become way more efficient. And the second is you will be assigned one-on-one coaching. And there's a twist to it where it's us as a staff who will be working with you. We're going to work with you with every single aspect in terms of gaining pitching velocity. And the main one is mechanics. And we are mechanical specialists. Both have worked at the MLB level and trained big leaguers. And they're going to come in and analyze your mechanics, get the biggest things you need to work on, and work with you daily to make sure that they become way more efficient. And so you're working on your full stack program to build the engine, build the frame to be able to throw hard. Now you're working with us as a staff to make sure your mechanics are becoming way more efficient. And when you combine these two and you combine it with an athlete who's willing to put in the work, well, it just becomes inevitable for you to gain velocity. And that's why we see a 97% success rate with guys gaining velocity with an average velocity increase of 3 to 5 miles an hour. Some have even increased 10 plus miles an hour. And the one bonus that we do at the Pitcher Lab is we do 2 to 3 classrooms per week. And these classrooms are very in-depth, high-knowledge classrooms where I am sharing, our coaches are sharing on what we think are very important in terms of gaining pitching velocity. And it's knowledge way more in depth than what I just talked about, which is what I want to pass over to you so that you can go out and train at a high level even after the Pitcher Lab. And so if this is something that you feel like you would be very interested in, top link in the description. You can go in there, book a call with me so that we can talk about if this is the best fit for you, and then we can get you rolling straight away.